Today we're going to show you how to cook the perfect fillet. Step 1, take your fillets and throw them in the trash. Step 2 is take out your rib eyes and we're going to cook a rib eye instead. Hello, my name is Don Agate. I am the owner of Good Eats and Sips in Skaneateles, New York, and I'm here today to show you how to cook a perfect steak. I have been a chef or been at the helm of several notable steakhouses in my career. I've been cooking steaks professionally for 20 plus years. And so recently I was at Del Lago at Portico by Fabio Viviani. I've worked at Landmark in Manhattan for Mark Murphy. And I also was at Fort Worth, Texas for Eddie V's, where I got the 2011 Top Chef of the Year award. So I know a thing or two about cooking steaks. I think I've cooked a steer from nose to tail. I've done everything from a simple sear all the way up to a very elaborate preparation like at Portico, where we would dry age in-house and then sous vide the steaks and then finish them in a charcoal oven. Today we're going to keep it simple though, and we're going to show you guys how to cook the perfect steak according to me. So to cook the perfect steak takes 3 things. We're going to need our ingredients, which is going to involve our seasoning and our steaks. We're going to need our method of preparation, which is going to be how we're going to cook the steak, and then time. So let's get started with the most important part, the steak itself. So here we have 3 different cuts of steak. Most people are familiar with the filet mignon, which is the nice tender piece of steak here. We have the New York strip, and then we also have a nice boneless ribeye here. When selecting steaks, there's a couple things you want to look for. In grocery stores, they mainly sell choice steaks, and that's what you're going to see. Unless you go to Wegmans, you'll see that they do have a selection of prime steaks. As far as steak grading goes, you can select from prime, choice, select. Bottom line though, what you're looking for is a good amount of marbling, and marbling is going to be the intermuscular fat, and fat equals flavor. You need the fat in the steak to create a juicy, flavorful steak. With prime steaks, you're going to have a more heavy marble to them. Choice is going to be a little bit less. Select is going to be not so much marbling. It's going to be from a larger animal too. But what I'm looking for in steaks is a compact loin, meaning from a younger animal. So you can get a 16-ounce strip steak that's nice and compact like this, and it's got a nice tall wall to it. But you can also get a 16-ounce strip steak that's very wide, and it's gonna be a thin steak, okay? We want a nice thick steak that's not gonna overcook on the grill. So you want a good thick steak like this. And you can see this ribeye here is beautiful. It's gonna cook up really nice for us. When you get into CAB, certified Angus beef, you'll see that carried at a couple places. All that is means that they have an extra 10 or 13 stipulations they have when they grade the steak. So it's going to probably test out more in the upper 2/3 choice to prime category. If you're shopping at a local farmer's market and you're looking to buy from one of your farmers, what I always ask them is what the age of the animal was at the time of slaughter. I typically find that when an animal is 3 to 4 years old, the loins are going to be longer and larger, which means what I was saying with like the strip steak, it's going to be a wider steak, not necessarily better, a little bit tougher. As far as grass-fed is great. Most animals are all grass-fed. It really depends on what they're finished on. Corn finished steaks are always going to have a sweeter taste to them and a better mouthfeel because they're going to have more intermuscular fat. You need the corn in their diet to create that fat in the muscle. 100% grass-fed steak, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just going to have a more mineral flavor to it. It's going to have less fat, so it's going to be a little bit more mealy to the mouth. But corn-fed or corn finished is really going to be where it's at for the steak. You need something that's going to have that nice buttery mouthfeel. So, now that we got our steaks, the next thing we're going to talk about is how to season the steaks. Montreal steak seasoning, if you have that in your cupboard and you want to cook a good steak, the first thing you want to do is take it and throw it in the trash. Montreal steak seasoning was created as a pastrami rub. If you like Montreal steak seasoning on your steak, you probably like the flavor of Montreal steak seasoning and not the steak itself. So There's nothing wrong with that if you want that on your steak, but what I find with Montreal steak seasoning is that it really takes away from the flavor, and we want to complement the flavor of the beef itself. So I stay away from using barbecue sauces. If you want to put a barbecue sauce on your steak, that's great to finish with, but you don't want to start it because the heavy amount of molasses and brown sugar will end up browning or burning your steak. Same thing with rubs. I don't typically get into rubs when I sear a steak or put a steak on a grill because they're ground too fine. And if you're not a very skilled chef and you can't control that heat well, you'll end up burning all those herbs and spices that are in the rub before they can actually caramelize and flavor your steak. So if you are stuck on using the barbecue rubs, barbecue sauce and stuff like that, save them for the end. And we'll talk about how we're going to season the oil and layer flavors into the steak later on. So for this demonstration, we're really just going to stick to two things: salt and pepper. There's basically three types of salt in my book. You have a flake sea salt, which is this. You can see it's large crystals. We have the most common kosher salt, a flat flake salt. It's kind of a tongue twister. And then we have iodized salt. Iodized salt is really only good for two things. It's for using in a gargle if you have a sore throat, or seasoning French fries because it sticks to French fries. I really don't use iodized salt in anything else that I do in the kitchen. And a fun trick or a fun little experiment to have at home, if you have all three of these salts, and I've done this in every restaurant I've ever worked in, is I will have my staff start by taking the sea salt, putting a small amount on their tongue and tasting it. And you'll see it has a nice clean flavor. It washes away quickly, but it's not a high salinity to it. It takes a second to dissolve. It's gonna have a little crunch to it. And then you have your kosher salt, which is a flat flake grain. It's gonna dissolve easily. It's gonna be a little bit saltier. And then last, if you take your iodized salt, it's gonna be like sucking on a lemon. Most people don't realize that what they're tasting is iodine, and iodine is going to have a bitter, astringent taste. So like I said, iodized salt, we don't use that. So we're going to get to seasoning our steaks here, and when we're ready to start cooking, what I encourage everyone to do is, if you're cooking a whole meal for your honey at home or for your family, start by seasoning your steaks. Pull your steaks out of your refrigerator, get them out. Let them sit out at room temp for a minimum of 20 to 30 minutes. And that's going to do a couple things. That's going to bring your steaks up to temp so they're not ice cold in the middle. And you want to be careful because if they're too cold in the middle, they're going to overcook on the outside and still be raw in the middle. So we've had these pulled out now for a while. They're nice and loose. You can see they're ready for the seasoning. So we're going to use the kosher salt. So kosher salt is what we're going to use to season. And then we're going to finish when we're done with this nice sea salt. So seasoning, season liberally, lots of salt. Don't be afraid to put salt on your steaks. And you can see, it's gonna go in there, pat that in. We'll hit it with a little bit of cracked black pepper. And again, if you don't have a pepper mill, buy the coarser grain cracked black pepper. And that's going to play into what I was saying about barbecue rubs. You don't want the grains to be too fine because when they're too fine, they burn too quickly, okay? So we want that nice coarse grain black pepper. We're gonna flip them over and we're gonna sear them on the other side here. I'm just gonna cut that little tail off. Save that for a little snack for later. And again, season the other side. Now we want this to sit out seasoned for about 10 to 15 minutes, and a couple things are gonna happen while the salt is sitting on the meat. The salt, first off, is going to dissolve, and that's why the kosher salt works so well, because it's a flat flake and it sits flat on the steak. But it's also, when it dissolves in the steak, it's going to extract the moisture or liquids from the steak, and it's going to come out on top in these little bubbles that you'll see, little puddles on the steak, and that is creating a brine on the steak. And we want that brine, because that brine is going to help with a couple things. It's going to help that season get deeper into the steak, but it's also going to help us achieve that nice brown crust on the outside through the Maillard process. So we're going to let that sit for a second and just season up, and while we're doing that, we're going to get our pan ready. So whether you're cooking on a pan on your stove or you're cooking on the grill, you want to make sure that it's preheated. It's not something where you can just go turn on the heat and then throw your steak in. You need your grill or your pan to be heating up for a while to get that nice conductive heat in there, because what we don't want to happen is for the temperature to fall too low and then it's going to burn the steak, or the steak will end up stewing in the pan. Since we're doing these today on the stove with a cast iron, you need something that's a heavy bottom. If you have a thin bottom pan, it's not going to hold the heat the way you want it to. You need something that's going to be thick enough so when you put the steak in the pan, the temperature is not going to drop. So this is where you want to pull the cast iron out of the cupboard, wherever, get it heating up on a low heat so it's nice and warm. We want it to be at a minimum of 400 degrees or more to get that sear on the steak that, you know, is so achievable, so you can get that nice crust. If you have non-stick pans or really thin aluminum pans, these aren't going to work well for what we're trying to do here. So the next part is going to be the fat or the oil that we use. You want to use a canola oil or a vegetable oil when cooking your steaks in a pan like this or on the grill. You need something with a high smoke point. Canola oil, vegetable oil work the best. Stay away from extra virgin olive oil. Extra virgin olive oil has a low smoke point, meaning that it's probably going to burn and give you a bitter flavor before the steak is done. I would stay away from some of the other lighter oils, but light olive oil will work. That actually has a high smoke point, but make sure you buy specifically light olive oil. But this is also a good time, you know, when you get those holiday gift baskets where you get like that random bottle of avocado oil or those, you know, specialty oils you don't really know what to do with, you know, sunflower oil or something like that. Those all have really, really high smoke points. I think avocado oil is upwards of the 500 degrees. Those work well for this application. So if you have those little, you know, decorative bottles tucked into the back of your cupboard there, this is a good opportunity to pull them out, crack them open and use them, because they'll work really well for this. So we're going to get this pan heated up nice and hot. We're going to wait to add our oil right before we go in. While the steaks are cooking, this is where we're going to layer in our flavors as well. So when we put the steaks in the pan to sear, we want to add flavor or layer flavors into the steak. I don't want to eat raw herbs, but what we can do is we can throw the herbs right into the oil and some shallots and garlics that I got from my garden. And what we'll do is we'll baste this and we'll season the oil that we're cooking with, and this is going to help get that layer of flavor into the steaks that we're cooking. So here I have some oregano, some shallots that I just got, and some nice elephant garlic that we're just going to use to baste. And I'm not worried about cutting these things, you know, fine or small. We're just going to cube them up and use them for basting, because we're not really going to be eating any of this. It's really just going to be used for seasoning the oil as we're basting the steaks. So that's ready to go. So we can come over here, we'll check our pan, we'll see if it's hot enough. I got this nifty little probe. These work great. I suggest everyone has one. You could probably pick one up here at Gerharz, but you need to have that minimum of 400 degrees, and this is, to achieve that. I like one that's a dual, where you have a scanner which will scan the hot temperature of the surface, but also a little instant read probe, because that way we can tell that our steak is done properly. We'll add the oil to the pan now. It's okay if it smokes when you add to it. Don't be afraid to add a good amount of oil. You can see that I have almost what would be considered a shallow fry. So we want, you know, a good centimeter or, you know, a little bit less than that of oil in the pan. We want to see little wisps of smoke coming off of it. We're not burning the oil yet. And what we'll do is we'll start here with, let's do the ribeye and the New York strip. We'll do them side by side. The fillets, we can worry about them later. So always place the steak in the pan and place it down so it goes away from you. You don't want to drop it this way because you have the tendency to splash oil towards you. So gently put the steak down. You're looking for that, and for that sear. You want to hear that immediate sear. This is where I'll turn the temp up a little bit, because as the steak goes in the pan, it's going to lower the temperature of the pan just enough So we're gonna raise the temp up to compensate for it. And again, here goes the New York strip. Put that down right there. Now we're just gonna let those sit for a little bit. There's not much we need to do. Right now, it's starting to sear on the sides. It's almost shallow frying. We're looking to build up that nice crust that everybody looks for. Another good point is I prefer, like if you're going to grill your steaks, there's certain steaks that I like to grill and there's certain steaks that I don't like to grill. I find that the dry, high heat of a grill is too aggressive for a fillet. Fillets don't have a lot of intermuscular fat and therefore they don't have a lot of flavor. If I'm going to cook a fillet, I will sear it in a pan before I grill it on the grill. I just find that it gets dry and a little bit mealy on the grill. Now, high fat steaks like a ribeye and a New York strip here, these do really well on a grill because again, the fat is gonna help break down in the meat and make it a more juicy steak, more tender as well. So we can check these, see how they're doing. You can see that nice crust forming on them. We're just gonna let those keep going. Crank it up a little bit. So for the doneness of a steak, if someone asks me how I like my steak done, I prefer, it depends on the type of steak that I'm going to be eating. If I'm ordering a fillet or a flank, or if I'm getting a skirt steak, I'm typically going to order those more on the rare side or rare itself. There's not a lot of connective tissue. If the flank steak is, sliced properly, there's really not going to be an issue with it. But with a ribeye and a New York strip, since there's so much fat and connective tissue, you need a little bit more heat and cook time in order to break down the fats and connective tissue to get them to melt into the meat. So if I order a ribeye or a New York strip, I'm gonna order those more on the medium side, maybe mid-rare plus medium, simply because I want those fats to break down into the meat. So here's where we're gonna add a little bit of flavor to the steak. We're gonna throw in some garlic, some shallots, and some oregano. We're just gonna baste our steaks real quick. And what we're trying to do is kind of flavor the oil. There we go. And this will get right into the steaks there. And all we're doing is just basting it with the fat in the pan here. Now these steaks, we're going to take them up to about 125, 126, and we should check those now and see where they're at. Now people say rare, I thought rare is 126, and I'll be like, you're right. So we're at 124, so we can probably pull this one off. You're right, rare is going to be 120, but the steaks are going to continue to cook. So there's the carryover cooking that we need to consider. That even though, if you look on guidelines, cook to 126 for a rare, I like to pull them off at 120 or 118 typically, because they're gonna raise in temperature about 5 to 10 degrees. Now to tent or not tent, if you wanna put a piece of aluminum on them, that's totally up to you. That's gonna help keep the heat in. I know that with this beautiful crust that we just achieved, I don't like to put the tent on it because it's going to steam a little bit underneath the tent and you're going to get a little bit softer of a crust. But overall, if you have a roasting rack, putting them on a roasting rack does really well because as they sit on that one side, they're going to stew a little bit underneath there, okay? So these are resting here. So we're letting the steaks rest here. And that's going to do a couple things. The whole idea of getting a sizzling steak on a plate or, throwing down a steak fresh from the grill on the plate to cut into isn't going to lead you to your best product. You need to let the steak rest for 5 to 10 minutes. It really depends on how thick the steak is. But I would say minimum 5 minutes, preferably 10 minutes. And what that's going to do is allow all the juices to get reabsorbed into the intermuscular fibers there. If you take a steak right out of the pan or the grill and you go right into cutting it, it's going to bleed out on you. You might have achieved the perfect mid-rare or rare, but you'll notice as you cut through it, it's going to bleed out, and by the time you get done eating your steak, you're probably going to be eating a steak that's more on the medium mid-well, simply because it's lost all those beautiful juices. So now that we've had our steaks resting here, and since this is steak that I'm going to be eating with Anthony, I've done it the way I enjoy it. I like to char lemons. This is something I picked up at Portico. So a nice charred lemon is something you can do on your grill or on your cast iron pan before you cook the steak. It adds a nice acidity, which I enjoy with my steak. So we charred the lemons up here. And then I figured we would go ahead and slice these up so we can see what our beautiful handiwork has come out to be. So the prize piece on a ribeye is going to be the decal, which is going to be that little flap of meat right there. So if you have somebody you really love at home, you should give them that piece. And you can see. Beautiful. And you can see now that the steak is rested, you're not getting that puddle of juices at the bottom of your cutting board here. So now we can finish the steak with a little bit of the coarse Maldon sea salt. And then I always prefer it with a little bit of charred lemon. So with New York strips, just like with a flank steak, thin to win. So you want to cut nice thin slices. That tail there is just going to have a little bit of fat. There's nothing wrong with it. You can see these came out really, really nice. And it wasn't a lot of time. So the whole process only took us about 10 to 15 minutes. But as long as you have everything ready to go, this isn't something where you start cooking and you walk away to make the mashed potatoes or to, you know, finish the macaroni and cheese. You really, when you're cooking a steak and you want it to come out perfectly, you need to be able to focus in right on that. Now, when you have your rest time at the end, that's where you can go back, finish your salad, pull the bakers out of the oven, or finish your mac and cheese. But while you're cooking the steak, you want to be focused in on just cooking the steak. And you can see, look at that. Beautiful. Beautiful steak. And we'll go ahead and season that up. And we'll hit that with a little bit of lemon juice as well. All right, so we've had the fillets marinating here for a while. We season them with the salt, and you can see the salt has dissolved into the steak, and this is where you're gonna get those little puddles, which are kind of hard to see unless you get really close. But what's happened is it's created a little bit of a brine on top of the steak itself. This is a wonderful thing. If you can allow the time to let your steaks rest where the salt dissolves, and you'll see these little bubbles come up or little puddles on top, that's creating a brine on top of your meat. And then after another 5 or 10 minutes, these briny puddles will dissolve back into the meat. This is going to give you a better finished steak in the end. If you just take salt, throw it on there and throw it right on the pan, most likely what's gonna happen is the salt is going to fall right off. This is going to allow deeper penetration of the seasoning, but it's also going to create this nice crust on the steaks, which we're trying to achieve. So we already got our pan heating up in the back here. You can see it's already at a smoke point. We're gonna take these two fillets here, find the best spot to put them in at. And again, you're looking for that sear. That's what you're looking for. This is where you wanna have your hood fans going real strong. It is gonna create a little bit of smoke. If you don't have a hood fan, make sure you at least got your windows open in your house. But we're gonna let these sear away. I know that they're ready to flip. If you look on the sides here, it's almost like a pancake. You'll start to see these edges brown up a little bit. Once we see that brown edge, we know that the caramelizations happen on that bottom part and they're ready to be flipped over. Since these steaks have been resting for about 30 minutes or so outside at room temp, we shouldn't have to put them in the oven. The pan is hot enough, and we're gonna baste them after we flip them, that we should be able to finish them 100% in the pan. You don't have to turn on your oven. If you're just cooking them to mid-rare, this should be fine. Now, if you're cooking them up to medium, mid-well, or any higher, that's your choice. I personally wouldn't want to do it that way, but you might need to finish them in the oven and get them cooked up the rest of the way. So, we're gonna baste these ones with butter, oregano. Let's see. We're just starting to get little caramelized bits on the edges here. You can see it's just starting to brown there on the edge. See that? That's a good sign. I haven't touched the heat at all. The heat is still at high. It is smoking, so like I said, make sure you have your windows open or your hood fan on so you're not setting off the smoke alarm, but you need this high heat to get the sear that you want on the outside of the steak. So let's take a little peek. You see that? That's beautiful. That's what we're looking for right there. And you can see that's a nice crust. So that's going to add not only flavor, but texture to your steak. So these are just about ready to flip over. You can see I'm not moving them very much. When you move them around, you're going to break that caramelization. It's not going to brown as well. You really don't need to do anything. Put them in here, let them set, take your time. Don't walk away and try to make the Caesar salad or something else while this is going on. Stay in front of this pan, make sure you're paying attention to what's going on. So I'd say now we're probably a good time to let these flip, and you see that is what you're looking for there. That's beautiful. That's going to be a delicious steak. So we can turn the temperature down now. I'm going to put it on like a medium to a medium-low heat, and I'm going to put the steaks on a different spot. Since those created cold spots where they're searing, I'm now going to put them on a different hot spot in there so the other side sears just as well as these. You can see if we had a microphone, you could hear that kind of scraping noise. You got that nice crust on there, which is going to add beautiful texture. So now we're going to begin basting the steaks. So we're going to baste the steaks. It's going to help them cook more evenly because we're adding the hot oil on top. But this is also where we can add flavor. Fillets themselves do not have a lot of flavor. They don't have a lot of fat to them. You're basically eating them for tenderness. You're not going to get a lot of big steaky flavor like you would with a New York strip. So we want to get as much flavor as we can in there. So we're going to flavor the oil. We're going to add butter because with fillets, since they're lacking so much of the fat, we're going to add butter there to help with the mealiness and the, ooh, it's a little too hot. So we'll add that butter there and we'll baste them in the butter. That butter is really going to help with the mouthfeel. It's going to add a buttery flavor, obviously, but it's really going to help them with the mouthfeel. It's going to be a softer, more buttery steak. And that oregano that I put in there is really just adding another component of flavor to the steak itself. There we go. Now remember, the oil is extremely hot, so this isn't where something you want to go real fast. Take your time, just dump the oil over top. You're just looking to coat them. You don't want to splash the oil. Make sure you got a nice oven mitt or a towel in your hand so you're not burning yourself. The pan, if you're using a cast iron, since you're getting the pan so hot, the handle is going to be very hot. So just be careful at this point. This is where, mistakes can happen. You can get burned. And I'm willing to guess we're pretty close at this point, so we'll go ahead and we'll probe our steaks and see how we're doing. The probe only measures up until that little dimple there, so we're not going to go all the way deep down into it. We're just going to go right into there so we're in the center of the steak. If you go all the way down, you're basically taking the temperature of the bottom of the pan. So we'll just drop it in there. You can see we're not even in the 90s yet. So this is what I would consider blue rare. So we'll let that keep cooking there. We can keep basting them. With the filet, we're looking to get this up to about 120 degrees, 126 is what you want for a rare. I see no point in cooking these any higher than 134. Again, it's up to you, but I feel like when you cook it higher than that, you're gonna get a dry, mealy steak. And then we come over here, you can see that other side is seared up real nice there. And get that temp brought up just a little bit more. Oh, fire went out. There we go. That's gonna help. Now you can use the trick of well done, medium well, medium, mid-rare, and then rare. That works for sometimes, but I think overwhelming, if you're looking to cook a perfect steak, trust your probe. Your probe is never gonna lie to you because no two steaks are the same. A New York strip is going to feel differently than a filet. A filet is a tender piece of meat, but a New York strip is gonna be a firmer piece of meat. It's gonna be more dense muscle, so it's gonna feel more dense, and you're probably gonna end up taking it off before it's done, where a filet is gonna be very tender. Even when it's at the mid-well or well-done point, it's still gonna feel pretty squishy. So that's why I don't always rely on, you know, the finger temp test. You're always gonna do right if you have a nice probe thermometer and you're gonna know where it's at automatically. And you can see we're already getting close. We're up to 95 on that one. Almost 100 on that one. So I'd say about another 3 or 4 minutes here. We're gonna be right at that 118 range where I like to pull them off. I pull them off at 118 because it's such a thick steak that it's gonna carry over about another 5 to 10 degrees. So even though we pulled it off at 118, and you know, if you read that if you want a, you know, a rare steak, you should cook it to 126. Well, we are gonna cook it to 126, but we're gonna let that carryover heat finish it. So as it sits out on the cutting board, it's gonna raise up a little bit more. And then in 5 minutes, you'll see that it's gonna be at a perfect 125, 126, and it's gonna be well rested. So it's not gonna bleed out on us. There we go. Let's see. 105. Getting there. It takes time to cook a good steak too. You know, with your fillets are typically going to be cut, you know, at least 1 inch to 2 inches thick. You know, your rib eyes or your New York strips, about a ½ inch to 1 inch. You know, it's a larger, flatter piece of meat with more surface area, so they're going to cook a little bit quicker. Where your fillets are going to need a little bit more time, and this is also where letting them sit out at a certain amount of time at the room temperature is going to help. Because if you were to take these out cold from the refrigerator, what would happen is we would sit here for a while cooking them, and the outsides would end up getting well done while the insides are still very cold or blue raw. So let's go ahead and we'll flip this guy over. Let's take this one out. Beautiful. I'd say we're almost there. Once steaks get over the 100-degree range, you'll see that they start cooking a lot quicker. It's pretty slow uptick up until 100 degrees, but once you hit 100, they rise pretty quickly. So 100 degrees is where you really want to start paying attention. We can go ahead and kill the heat because there's enough heat in this cast iron to keep them going. And yeah, we're there. Go a little bit deeper. So we're at 124 on that one, and let's see this one, 121. So I think they're perfect time to pull these off. So we're very carefully going to move these over to the cutting board to rest. Let's knock off any more of that oil. And we're going to let these sit out for about 5 to 10 minutes and just let them rest so all those juices go back into the steak itself. Now you can finish these with a little bit of butter on top. We'll do one with butter and one without. Again, all this is going to do is add a little bit of flavor with the butter, but it's going to add that fattiness, which gives you that nice mouth feel. So it's a nice chew to it. Beautiful. Just let that melt right in there. All right, so we're going to slice this up now. So this has been resting for about 5 minutes. You can kind of hear it. I don't know if you can get but you can hear that crust. And that's what you want. That's adding flavor and texture to the steak itself. So now we're ready to cut it. So we're just going to slice nice thin slices. That one's a little, oh boy. That one might have been the one that was a little, there we go.
You tell Greg that steaks are done? I can't wait for you to see this shot when this video comes out, because this shot looks amazing right now.
Really?
Yeah.
It's a nicely cooked steak. So thank you. My name is Don Agate. I hope this has been informative for you for cooking the perfect steak at home. If you're ever interested, you can come and visit me at Good Eats and Sips in Skaneateles. We'd love to see you there. If you're ever interested in picking up the perfect cooking equipment to make the perfect steak, don't forget about Gerharz here in Syracuse to pick up your meat probe or any of your cast iron pans to perfect this perfect steak. Other than that, have a wonderful day and enjoy your steak.